Welcome, adventurers. I'm Lex DM, or Sovereign Silver, and today we're going to talk about what it is that I love about running tabletop role-playing games. So, I've been running games for most of my life, and of all of the hobbies that I've ever picked up, this is the one that's never really gone away. I have fallen in and out of love of particular systems, but of the hobby as a whole, there's never been a time since I started playing that I didn't want to be at minimum playing, but almost always running games. Don't get me wrong, I love playing the game, whatever the game is. I love being a player and watching other people's creativity blossom as they run the game and show us their worlds and their takes on whatever system we're playing. But I have always preferred to be the one behind the screen, the one running the show. I don't know what that says about me, but that's just always been the case. As I was talking with my wife about video topic ideas that I could do that are a little less research intensive while I'm prepping for the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons ability checks and skills video that I'm working on, a couple of topics came up. Doing a side-by-side comparison of the art of specific monsters across the editions. Specifically, we were talking about Mind Flayers because they're my favorite monster and have been for ever since I saw the first picture of one from the first edition from the basic game and loved the art and just how weird they are. I actually have a original D&D Mind Flayer tattoo on my leg. It was my second ever tattoo. To mechanics and house rules that I use in my own game and how I think they benefit the game, which felt like a much bigger topic. We settled on a couple, and this particular one, what I love about game running, seemed simple on the surface. And as I sat down to really, really think about it and try to put it into words, it became apparent that a lot of what I love about the games rotates around a central theme. So I've got 4 main points for you today about what it is that I love about game running, and then we'll talk about how I think that they are all the same point wearing different hats at the end. This one's going to be a little rambly. I will do my best to stay mostly on topic, but I'm just going to kind of talk at y'all and hopefully you find something interesting or fun. If there's anything I hit on that you think you'd love to see a more extensive video or a short or hear me talk more about, please hit it in the comments and I'll try to get to it. But yeah, let's get into it here. So first and foremost, the first thing that I love about game running is the actual act of storytelling. I've been really fortunate to have some great storytellers in my life. My family all loved to talk, and I grew up getting bedtime stories read to me every now and then when she was home by my mother, and for a real treat when we went to go visit her, I would get bedtime stories told to me by my grandmother that she would make up on the spot. And they were always adventurous and exciting, and I think that started in me this idea that sharing stories and telling stories is a way to share experiences and build bonds between people. And so that aspect of being a game runner is something that I really enjoy and hold very, very special to me. The act of creating a story together. And in addition to that, one of my favorite things about being a game master is I get to start the story, but I don't get to decide ultimately where it goes. And there's something really exciting about that. It is in many ways similar to reading a novel, but not as in my players are playing through my novel that I've written, but exactly the opposite. I am getting to experience a story that I don't know what the end is going to be. I have a fair bit of control over the narrative as far as what I can present to my players. But for me and for how I like to run my game, everything is always an opt-in. So ultimately, where our story ends and how it ends isn't in my control. And there's something really wonderful and exhilarating about that, and allows for a shared story that you as the game master, or I guess I as the game master, and my players get to then take away and keep with us. It's something that we experienced and created together and then can reminisce on and share and talk about. Whenever my group of friends gets together, and I know this is true for so many groups of gaming friends, whether that's video games or tabletop role-playing games or anything else, or board games, but whenever we get together, there will inevitably be a point when we start talking about stories that happened around the game table. And having those shared stories that span dozens of different friend groups and decades of my life is something that's really special to me. And whenever I get to add a new friend or a new person to that shared group of people who all can share stories of Dungeons and Dragons together, I'm always really grateful and really excited that they're now also going to get to be a part of this big interconnected group. And not just stories that you can share with people who were there. Put any 3 D&D nerds together and they're going to want to talk about cool things their characters did at their various games, and ideally hear about them. And I think that's really cool that we have this shared language of experiences that we get to talk about with strangers. When I go to gaming conventions, I get to sit down and play with people who get to tell me about cool things their characters did and moments of high drama that they got to experience. And because I am also a game runner and we have this shared language to tell our stories in, I get to experience vicariously that triumph or failure or whatever with them. And for me, that's something really special. And something that I find hard to hold in other hobbies that aren't gaming in whatever form. But for me in particular, the best stories that I get to share with my friends come from tabletop role-playing, and watching my friends reminisce about or tell to people who weren't there stories that center around adventures that I wrote and scenarios that I crafted gives me personally a really great sense of joy and fulfillment. And so for that reason, it's number one, is the connection we get from these shared stories is something that I personally really deeply value and has given me a lot in my life. Number two, I love world building. I really like the act of creating a town, a country, a whole continent, or a whole planet, whatever shape it happens to be, for my players to get to explore and experience. And world building can be as big as you want. Like I said, it can be whole planets with interconnected continents and countries and histories. And it can be as small as that shop over there that they're going to go into and have an interesting interaction with Kelgak, the half-orc, who is secretly in love with gardening, but due to cultural pressures is a weaponsmith. Like, there's this sort of idea that world building, there's sort of this pressure sometimes, especially for newer game masters, that world building needs to be this large, grandiose passion project. And while it can be, and some of my favorite world building is that way, when I sit down with a spark of inspiration and the muse is sitting on my shoulders and just create, there's something also really wonderful about very small moments, and they can be equally impactful and are equally valid. So I don't want to make it sound like world building has to be this big, large idea, because I personally find just as much value in the little details and the small stories as I do in the grand cosmic ideas and conflicts. And that's on the solo side of world building. But I also, even more so, I really love the cooperative idea. I first heard of the idea of bottom up world building from WebDM, and I've always really loved this idea that when you are sort of creating your setting and creating your world, it's good to have big ideas about the large scale things like big cosmic events. So like in my game, we follow roughly the Greyhawk cosmology, but there were like major celestial wars at the dawn of time and whatnot. And it's good to know those, but sometimes and oftentimes I find the biggest value for me is when I'm working on something that is only because a player asked me about it. Or even better, when I'm collaborating with a player to answer a question that had never occurred to me. A recent example, one of my players, I'm just going to call them by their character name, Pachi, is a sailor and a wanderer, and has spent a decade wandering the world of Hyarbarrin, our homebrew world, and has only recently returned home with this grand quest to restore their homeland to what it was before a cataclysm that happened millennia ago shaped it forever into a burned wasteland desert. And Pachi turns to me at some point, we're just hanging out, and asks, what do the stars look like in Hyarbarrin? And I stopped for a minute, and this started a hour and a half conversation about, well, does the planet that we're on rotate around a sun and spin, and therefore the sky moves the way it does in our world? It doesn't necessarily have to, since we objectively have gods of the sun and moon that, at least according to the people who espouse their myths, make the sun and moon rise. And so we ended up, so I did a little research. I looked into what the rules were for other night skyboxes, to use a video game term, in other settings like Greyhawk and Faerun. And what we ended up deciding on is that Hyarbarrin doesn't spin, and so the stars are static, which then led to this next idea that, taking somewhat inspiration from Faerun, where the stars are ancient spells written into the sky, that the idea that there's an ancient story written across the stars of Hyarbarrin, our world, and people have devoted their whole lives to trying to collect all of the pieces and decode this ancient lost myth. And this then evolved into this character, Pachi. When they need to ground themselves, or when they need to think, they go out and stargaze, and are, as the most traveled member of the party, have the most of the cosmic story. And there's something really wonderful about the cooperative act of world building. Whether that's one of your players saying, hey, I think it'd be really cool for my character to belong to an organization that hunts undead, and then you sit down and you make that together, or you go away and make it yourself, but it wouldn't have existed before that. Or, hey, I want my character to be from a woodcutting village up in this region. Is that something we can come up with? I really love the cooperative aspect of world building, and really letting the world be as much the players as it is mine, and almost more the players the farther down you get from the big ideas. That's something that's really wonderful for me, and I will often think most fondly about those things that didn't exist until a player asked about them inside a world, and then try to seek to make those things more and more relevant to the story we're telling together. Part 3! I have always been a lover of learning new skills, of learning new facts, of learning new things. And I find that as I continue to get older, often the impetus for learning new things comes from game running. Whether that's a rudimentary understanding of how a computer works because I'm running Shadowrun, or a understanding of how steam engines work because I want to find a way to make trains happen in my Dungeons and Dragons game. More and more, when I learn something new and learn it deeply, it's because of a game I'm running. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I actually really love that this hobby also inspires me to continue to learn and to continue to learn more and more. Almost everything I know about linguistics and about macroeconomics are all because of trying to do things in my game and then going first to a real world example of, oh, how did that happen in our world? And do I want to keep that the same, or do I want to incorporate a fantastical element? A quick list off the top of my head of things that I now know more than I thought I ever would about because of D&D. As mentioned, how steam engines work, which is really cool. The medieval guild system in Western Europe. I learned all about the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period of feudal Japan for a campaign setting. All about how weather actually forms and how geography and geographic features like lakes and mountains affect weather, and then conversely how weather patterns shape cultures and peoples around them. Just to name a few, that last one especially because I ended up having a player who was a geography major in college, and he kept pointing out when my deserts didn't make sense, so I decided to try to make some that made sense, and then eventually I started saying, shut up, it's magic, which is my favorite answer. Always said playfully, to be very clear, and he knows that I adore him. But just to name a few of things that I got inspired to learn and to continue to learn about because of world building and game running. And there's also all sorts of cool mechanical things. There are systems that I learned for one game that I then incorporate into another, like hex crawls. I really developed a hex crawl system for Dungeons and Dragons and really learned the hex crawl system for Dungeons and Dragons. And then I was running a Shadowrun game, which doesn't have really a good travel system, but when I plopped my Shadowrunners into the wilderness, I had a system ready to go for navigating the wilderness and things they might run into, or at least a set of skills and tools that I could use. Definitely thinking a DM's toolbox or GM's toolbox section would be a viable set of videos. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. I have lots of them that I personally use and love. But that inspiration to continue to learn, and that inspiration of things to be excited to learn about, for me often comes from game running, and I'm really grateful to that. And it's always really exciting to then get to share this cool thing I learned and incorporate it into my world and then talk to my players about it. Last campaign, we had a whole adventure arc based around drow attacking a mining town. And so I decided to try to figure out why. This is often how I end up developing adventures, which is I had the idea, drow attacking a mining town, and then I had to go, okay, why? And that led me to researching how mining was done in Western Europe in the Middle Ages. And boy, howdy, did it suck. Not that I think mining has ever been a particularly enjoyable occupation, but that led me to doing research on that, which led me to developing an adventure, and getting to know those kinds of things as someone who likes to just know stuff was really exciting and not something I would have ever really delved into. Game running also is a constant driver for me to keep reading and expanding the kind of media that I consume. Setting up for the Wild Winds Desert, which is our current campaign setting, I got to seek out and read books based on cultures that aren't directly linked to my own. I read Egyptian authors and stories set in North Africa, and trying to sort of gain inspiration and also see what kind of stories are told by the people who are very connected to that part of the world. And I loved them, and they were wonderful. And I'm very glad that I had that impetus to seek out stories I may not have otherwise, which is something that I find often starts from game running. And so I really love that it gives me an excuse and a reason to continue to learn and grow. And so that's one of the reasons that I really adore running games, and one that I don't see get talked about very often, but for me is certainly a really important one for sure. Number 4, I really enjoy creating scenarios and challenges for my players to overcome. Now, whether that is mechanical, a hallway filled with dangerous and terrible traps, whether that is martial, a great beast for them to fight, or whether that's emotional, a difficult relationship for them to navigate, the actual mechanics of running the game is something that I genuinely enjoy. And I think this is the place where I see the most people who are trying to figure out whether they like DMing struggle with, the actual minutia of running a game. I actually really enjoy, and I don't think I would still be running games at the frequency and level that I do if I didn't enjoy that. Now, I have worked very hard to develop a pretty robust set of skills and tools that allow me to run games at a level that I think is quite high and I am comfortable with without tearing my hair out. And I definitely think that contributes to my enjoyment of it. But for me, the actual mechanics of crafting encounters, adventures, and campaigns is genuinely something I really enjoy. I love taking all of the tools that a particular setting gives me inside the fiction we're making together and using them to create difficult scenarios for my players to ideally overcome or to be defeated by and encouraged to go, grow, come back and beat. And that watching my players struggle against and overcome some terrible monster or scheming NPC or obstinate noble is something I really love. I love watching the moments of triumph. I love watching the moments of despair as they wonder if this will be possible. And that doesn't mean that I always weight things in their favor. I will often write scenarios that either I don't know if they're beatable. I certainly think they are, and I hope they are, but I'm not positive. I will sometimes write mysteries or questions or puzzles that I don't necessarily have the answer to. These used to be referred to as black doors. The idea that you pose a obstacle that you don't have a predetermined solution to, and then you ask your players to solve it using their tools and just kind of go with it until you feel like you've heard a solution that makes sense to everyone at the table, and then they succeed. Things like that where I get to make a scenario or a monster and then watch my players find the information about it, travel out to encounter it and then go through the actual encounter, that sort of general arc that for me is the usual arc of almost all of my encounters on either a micro or a macro level, is something I really enjoy. And there are lots of tools out there on the internet and in print to make this easier for people, and I use some of them. I have all sorts of books of NPC generators and town generators that I use as inspiration, and I think there's a great place for that in people's game prep. But the actual crafting of a session, sitting down and looking at the adventure so far, looking at where the adventure is headed and where I would like it to end, or where I think it makes sense for it to end, and putting together a 3 to 4 hour, or what I think will be a 3 to 4 hour, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's significantly less, that I think will be super fun and engaging and move that plot forward in interesting and unique ways, is something I really love. And then getting to watch my players, most of whom are my friends, overcome them or be defeated by them, but not beaten by them, is something I really love. And so for me, I think partially because I've been doing it for as long as I have, and I have this really robust set of skills and tools, the actual game running side of it is in many ways my favorite part. The actual minute-to-minute game running that I know for so many DMs is often their least favorite. And I think that's why there are so many people who will come up with whole worlds or pantheons or settings, but often don't actually actualize them. And so one of the things that I'd really love to do with this channel is try to give people maybe some tools to make the actual running of the game a little easier on them, or allow them to run the kind of game they want to. I'm very fortunate to have, through the help of others and lots of learning and lots of time, figured out systems that work really well for me to run the games that I'm really, really happy with. And I would love to help others get there as well. So as I sat down to write this and really think about it, I realized that there was a theme that ran through all of these, which is that so much of what I love about running games actually comes down to so much of what I love about some of my other passions, like music and cooking, which is I really love using my creativity to make my friends and others happy. The thing that it all boils down to for me is that I really love watching my friends or my players, if I don't know them well enough to get to call them friends yet, to watch them explore and encounter and work through a game that I've written and enjoy themselves. Now, enjoy themselves has some caveats, because not every game is triumphant, but I think a good game master makes the difficulties and the losses still feel enjoyable in the long run, as you know that if you have built the trust with your players, that really makes for a great game. They know that just because they lost now, that's going to be part of the story, and they will eventually hopefully get to triumph. And so, like I said, really, I feel like all 4 of my points were ultimately the idea of getting to use my creativity and my skills to make something my friends enjoy in different hats. And it was really interesting to think about. I have all of these wide-ranging thoughts on what good game running and bad game running looks like, and what I love about game running. And I could talk for another 2 hours if I just sat down and rambled at the camera. But so much of it boiled down to I really like using my creativity to make something my friends and players get to enjoy. I think finding that joy is so important if you want to have a long-term relationship with game running. And for me, I was very fortunate to find it and to keep reaffirming it over the last 20 plus years. So, yeah. If this is something you like, give us a like, a follow, and a share. We're a very brand new channel that I hope will only grow, but we shall see. If you want to watch a lot of these tips, tricks, and tools get used, check us out Wednesdays at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time on Twitch over at Sovereign_Silver to watch our game. It's really good, and we're in the middle of a really wonderful, high emotional, high octane arc. And keep tuned in on the various socials that are linked in on the channel for other shorter form stuff as I start putting it together. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see y'all next week for whatever we're going to talk about next. Stay safe, stay curious, stay nerdy, and I will see y'all next time.